Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome back to Wall Street Silver. Joining us today is a very, very special guest, Dr. Marc Faber, the editor and publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom Report. Welcome back, sir.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your show.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure having you on. The people love you here.
Thank you.
Dr. Faber, we are seeing protests all across the world due to inflation and the cost of living crisis. Places like Argentina, South Africa, Iraq, etc. Why aren't we seeing it in the US or Canada on a massive scale yet?
Well, because in the US and in Canada, the government has boosted the economy by handing out money. And also recently we had this relief of student debts. So the government is basically buying contentment of people and silencing them. And we've seen with the demonstration of January 6th of 2 years ago that it's actually dangerous to do demonstrations that are truly against the government. So as long as you demonstrate in favor of Biden and his policies and in favor of like movements like the BLM and so forth, that's fine. But if you demonstrate for, say, the freedom of Americans or against vaccines or against handouts, against deficits, against the war in Ukraine, which doesn't make much sense, then you are a threat to, you are labeled as a threat to democracy.
Yeah. You know, along with what you just said here, here's a famous quote from the Roman era, from the Roman Empire. Give them bread and circuses and they will never revolt. Here, I'll put that on the screen. And it's sort of, that sort of plays into what you just said. If the government bribes them with the bread, with the student loan forgiveness, or subsidizing their energy bills in Europe or whatever,
right?
It's sort of to keep the population under control, correct?
Yes, that's the way it is. But I think, you see, the demonstrations are also steered by the media. In Europe, nobody's protesting in favor of Russia. They all protest in favor of Ukraine. And, the media tells them, well, we have to fight for the freedom of Ukraine and so forth. But the sacrifices that are involved in this fight are immense and do not make any sense, because if you impose an economic war through sanctions of any sort, financial sanctions, expropriations, or trade sanctions, the idea should be that the person you sanction is hurt very badly economically. But actually, the sanctions in Europe have rather been a boon to Putin, and longer term, this we have to see very clearly, they will change permanently the way entire nations hold their funds in foreign exchange reserves, and they will create new trading routes. In other words, before, as you know, under a dollar reserve system, practically all trade was settled in US dollars. In future, I think the role of the US dollar, the importance of the US dollar, will diminish very considerably. Because India will trade with Russia in rubles, they'll trade with China in rupees or in yuan, and so forth. And China will trade with Africa in whatever currency, but they will have second thoughts about holding all their reserves in US dollars and have these US dollars one day seized by the US. I mean, in the case of Russia, I can see why the US does it. I do not agree with it, but I can see why they did it. In the case of Afghanistan, it's actually a human tragedy. It's a very poor country that is currently experiencing in many villages starvation, and the US blocks the foreign exchange reserves.
The war in Ukraine, you just said it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I tend to agree with you. The way we've it's not really clear why we're still doing this. I mean, I get it. Is there a reason why they're not even talking about negotiations at this point with Putin to try to resolve this? The economic pain on Europe just seems so ridiculous in terms of electricity prices, natural gas prices, oil prices. Why do you think they're not negotiating at all with Putin to try to find a resolution?
Well, I think, we and your viewers or listeners are mostly people in the financial sector or businessmen. And as you know, if you have a business and you have a strategy of selling certain products, and after 2 weeks, you can see some products are selling well and some are doing badly, you will adopt the strategy of your shop or restaurant in the sense that you eliminate things that don't sell well, and you kind of promote the things that sell well. If you have a portfolio of different equities, you add the positions that do well, but you don't add to the positions that are sour all the time. The government has a different strategy. The worse the outcome is, the more they will pursue that policy. And in Europe, the energy prices are high, not only because of the war, it's because of the reaction to the war of Western governments, but also because of the Greens, communists, the green communists in Europe. They call themselves green, but that's hard. And in their ideology, they are basically socialist communists. And what they want is basically eliminate what works in energy and what is efficient. Say nuclear energy is the most efficient source of energy as of today, but that they don't want. They want windmills. Now, the windmill idea, Don Quixote was fighting windmills already in the 16th century. And the windmill idea is maybe a good idea for Greta Thunberg, who isn't very, up to date in modern technology. But you cannot deliver the energy for the whole world with windmills. You're mad if you even think about this. Only a madman, someone who believes in fairy tales, green energy initiatives, they actually require so much energy to implement that the energy usage is going up instead of going down, because as prices go up, people would use less, but no, they have to use more because they are inefficient in the production of energy.
Yeah, no, I've seen several studies along those lines of how much coal and steel and concrete is needed in every single wind turbine. It's really ridiculous. There's not, you need fossil fuels to make wind turbines. And they don't seem to want to admit that. And that's a real problem with that ideology.
Well, there's another problem with the windmills, the blades.
The recycling.
Apparently, you cannot recycle them.
Yeah. I've seen that they're having to bury them in like,
No, you have to send them to the White House and to the Bundeshaus in Germany. And store them on German Autobahnen.
Yeah, no, I hear you. We're Wall Street Silver, and of course we always pay attention to the gold and silver markets here. Sure. Are you surprised by silver's now down at $18 an ounce, and gold is is in the $1,700 range now? Are you surprised gold and silver are so low with all the crises in the world?
the philosophical question is, can anything still surprise you? Because we have democracies. And when I went to school, I was told, well, we produce good people because in a democracy, you vote for the best people and they get at the top, to the top and so forth, and they run the business according to essentially democratic principles. But we have the worst governments, the most incompetent people at the top and so forth.
Right.
So suddenly I'm no longer surprised about anything. And then I was told, whenever I went to school or university or later on in my life, oh, in democracies, we have freedom. What did these freedom advocates do? They implemented lockdowns and closed down small shops and small businesses and bankrupted millions of people. You understand? This is not a democratic measure. No royalty has ever done that to its citizens in a kingdom. No feudal has ever done that. But this democracy did, as socialism did, by the way, through expropriations. But the question is also, what will the government do next? You know, they suddenly came out and said, everybody needs to have a vaccine. And if you don't have a vaccine, you cannot work in the police or in airlines and this and that and so forth. So that created labor shortages. So I'm used to extremely bad decisions, and I'm prepared to accept that the government will continue to implement horrific economic policies, horrific. They also didn't acknowledge inflation until just recently. The whole of last year, they said, oh, there's no inflation, it's transitory and so forth. There's a blip up and down and so forth, and so on. And then when you ask me, well, are you surprised of these setbacks in gold, silver, platinum, and by the way, industrial commodities? This year, most of them are down 20%, not oil, but the metals. And to this I respond, well, we have tightening liquidity. This we have to see. Is not obvious to everyone, but basically asset markets have been weak this year. And I never seen, I mean, I started to work in 1970, so I've had some experience, and I don't want to overplay the experience I had, because sometimes you forget things and so on. But I never seen that stocks and bonds would go down at about the same rate equally. Normally, when you have a stock market decline of 20%, as we had recently, it would signal a recession. Okay, I think we are in a recession, but it's the public doesn't see it that way because it's hidden by inflation. But we are in a recession, and at the same time, bonds went down. Normally, in recessions, the bond market rallies. In other words, interest rates come down. But this time around, as the economy weakened, interest rates went up. And when the inflection point will come, I don't know. But in this situation, first of all, it's quite obvious I'm sort of I wouldn't call a gold bug and silver bug, but under normal conditions, I believe that gold and silver is an attractive investment at the present time. I say under normal condition because when I look at these government officials, what they've done, they may one day say, well, the gold that you have is not yours anymore.
Right.
It's maybe more difficult to do nowadays than it used to be because there's a whole industry around the ETFs and so forth. And to go to CalPERS and, you know, to the pension funds, this is now no longer yours. Maybe a little bit touchy, but it can be done. They've done it already.
Yeah, we have that, you know, here in the United States, 30-year, the mortgage rates, 30-year interest rates have yesterday got above 6%. So, and you can already see it in our numbers, the housing market, the housing starts have all slowed down. The banks are laying off mortgage brokers. You can really sort of see that happening in the housing market, that's coming to a halt, which, and you can, we're all sorts of notices of layoffs are starting. I wouldn't be surprised if the unemployment rate starts going a little bit higher. And those types of numbers, that's when the Fed really starts feeling the pressure, right? To that they can't continue with the current tightening path when more and more people are unemployed, and that might be the trigger, you think, before they have to change policy?
Well, we don't know. The policy change could also come because of a financial institution that fails or something like that, or massive fraud, or a horrible earnings disappointment in a stock that is important, and the stock collapses. There are lots of reasons. They will find an excuse to ease. If they really can't find anything, they'll say, well, it's because of Putin we have to ease. And if Putin has already died, then they'll find Xi Jinping in China or somebody. You can be sure.
Yeah, they always have to have an enemy. They have to, if they don't have an enemy, they'll create an enemy for us.
Right.
Yes.
Trump. What do you think of Vladimir Putin? Do you think he's a rational actor? Do you think he's got a plan here, or is he just a madman on the loose out there, and he's just what's your gut instinct on what it will take for Russia to start normalizing and getting the energy flow? I mean, obviously the world needs the energy and the commodities from Russia. I mean, there's not enough natural gas and oil to just completely ignore Russia. I think that's sort of foolish of the Europeans and the Americans to believe that we can do without Russian energy. So what does it take to get back to normal? Is there any solution, or they're just going to keep hurting us by keeping this going long term?
Well, you asked actually 2 or 3 different questions in one sentence. First of all, he is rational, and he clearly outlined his view. He said, we don't want NATO in Ukraine. It's a very clear condition. The Western world, the US, has no strategic advantage to have NATO in Ukraine whatsoever. Zero. For what?
Yeah.
But no, they wanted to go and test him and annoy him. Also, they kept on building up the army in Ukraine. This is not an effort for the last 6 months. They've been doing this for 5 years, sending weapons and military personnel that trained the Ukraine army. The war has probably kind of, in terms of difficulty, exceeded his expectations. Also, he has overestimated the strength of the Russian military. He must have realized our military is hopeless in kind of day-to-day battle. That may be correct, because when Hitler invaded Russia, the Russian army was not at all prepared for the aggression.
Right.
It's only over time that they were able to respond. But when they responded, they responded with incredible firepower, incredible.
Yeah.
And that already happened 200 years ago when Napoleon invaded Russia. The Russian army retreated. And the last big battle was at Borodino in 1812. And the Russian army, officially, the French won, but it was a victory which was extremely costly, extremely costly. The Russian army retreated wisely. They just retreated and didn't want to fight anymore because the casualties were so high. So they thought, what for? We let them move further into Russia. And then the winter came, and that was then the end of the invasion, essentially, because
Wow.
the Russian had burned part of Moscow. So the French had to retreat. That's when the Russians and the Cossacks and everybody went after the French, when they started to retreat. That's when they beat them, really, not in the aggression. So we have to be very careful. And in my view, the neocons, there are some people that want war. Recently, an article appeared, and these are news that have been verified. They're not fake news. Apparently, the Russians and the Ukraine were negotiating. In came the poodle of the US, Mr. Boris Johnson, and said, no, we don't want that.
Mhm.
So they wanted war. They want the conflict to continue. I suppose that there's a lot of money to be made in Ukraine. You understand?
Right.
You give $13 billion or $20 billion or $1 billion to Ukraine, and someone gets some money back big time.
Oh yeah.
Big time.
Yeah. A lot of politicians in the United States seem to have a child or a brother who's a consultant or on the board of directors for some company.
Well,
Seems
we
to
have
be a very
the
common
son
story.
of a president who was
Yeah.
on the board of a company. So you understand, as say an observer, it's actually a very sad story. The ordinary people suffer at the front. The people of Ukraine, the Russian soldiers. We shouldn't discriminate and say, oh, the Ukrainian soldiers suffer and not the Russians. They both suffer.
Yeah, there's still
If
people.
you're Russian and 18 years old soldier, well, you are sent there. It's not you that decide you want to go and fight there. The army tells you you have to go there. So you have to feel sorry for these people, and you have to then ask yourself, you're in former times, the Roman emperors, they frequently went themselves at the front of the army and fought wars and fought battles. But here in Washington, they sit in armchairs, and each time they hear something, they immediately dig downstairs into shelter. They're a bunch of cowards, greedy cowards and conniving people. The outcome, regardless how it is bad. Yeah. If Russia perceives to have achieved some sort of a victory, it's not a very good outcome. If the US perceives to have achieved some sort of a victory, the outcome is even more unfavorable, because then they think maybe we can do the same in China. Rally. And but one thing I can say is that if you look at the stock market, basically is a mechanism of valuation of stocks, and in the case of bonds, the bond market. And a lot of it has to do with sentiment. In other words, if you feel good about something, if you are happy about something, if you are confident about something, if you have faith, and if you trust your government, and you think that the country is going into the right direction, you are willing to pay a higher price for an asset. If, on the other hand, the sentiment is negative and you think things are going to the pot, and that they will eventually increase taxation, and that Kamala Harris is funding a charity that bails out people out of jails that are criminals, send them into the street to commit crimes and so forth, then, you know, people feel not very safe. And that then has an impact on valuation and on business optimism. The businessman, he has a shop. To open a second shop, he has to have some optimism. To hire an additional staff, he needs some feeling of good feeling.
Mhm.
If he feels bad, he's not going to do it.
You mentioned Taiwan and China also during our conversation. What's your thought there? Do you think China's going to go for Taiwan would now be an opportune time for them to take advantage of the situation and go after Taiwan?
They don't need. But like in the case of Ukraine, they have a red line. The red line is if the US would build up a missile bases in Taiwan, there would be a reaction.
Sort of like Cuba, the Cuban Missile Crisis, Russia putting...
Yes, it may be a more significant reaction.
Gotcha. So you don't think it's likely that there's going to be any sort of military invasion of Taiwan anytime soon?
Let's put it this way. If I was thinking seriously that there'll be war, I wouldn't own any Asian stocks and have large Asian portfolios. But it is a possibility. I mean,
stuff.
We live in you asked me, are you surprised by gold and silver not having performed better? I said no, because we live in an environment where nothing should surprise you.
Right.
Yeah, that is true. Well, Dr. Faber, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and we're definitely going to call you again.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Dr. Faber.
And keep the picture of Miss Yellen in the cage.
Oh yeah. You want me to put Miss? There she's
there.
Back
She is.
I'll close the door.
She looks forward with a lot of curiosity.